The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Catherine adjusted her navy blue coat one final time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the crisp October air, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today would mark the end of an era that had defined not just her life, but the lives of millions who had watched her journey from a commoner to the Princess of Wales. William stood at the window of their private quarters, watching the gathering crowd below. Even at this early hour, people had begun to line the streets. Some held flowers, others carried handmade signs with messages of support. The sight should have warmed his heart, but instead, it filled him with a deep sadness that seemed to settle in his chest like a stone. "The children are asking questions again," Catherine said softly, breaking the silence that had hung between them like a heavy curtain. She moved to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the glass. "George wants to know why everyone looks so sad. Charlotte keeps asking if we're moving away forever." William's jaw tightened. The decision they had made wasn't one that came easily. For months, they had wrestled with the choice that now lay before them. The constant scrutiny, the relentless pressure, and most importantly, the threats that had begun to target not just them, but their children, had finally pushed them to a breaking point that even their strong marriage couldn't withstand. "What did you tell them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth, as much as they can understand. That sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions to keep the people they love safe." Catherine's voice cracked slightly on the last word. She had practiced this conversation with the children dozens of times in her head, but when the moment came, the words felt inadequate. The knock on their door came exactly at 9 o'clock, as scheduled. It was Thomas, their long-serving private secretary, whose usual composed demeanor couldn't quite mask the emotion in his eyes. Behind him stood 2 security officers, their faces professionally neutral, though everyone in the room understood the gravity of what was happening. "Your Royal Highnesses, the car is ready," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. He had served the royal family for over 2 decades, had witnessed births, deaths, celebrations, and tragedies, but nothing quite like this. Catherine picked up her small leather handbag, the same one she had carried on her first official engagement as William's wife. Inside were a few precious photographs, letters from the children, and a small piece of paper with an address written in her careful handwriting. Their new life awaited them in a place where royal titles meant nothing, where they could simply be William and Catherine, husband and wife, mother and father. The walk through the castle corridors felt endless. Each step echoed off the ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Portraits of William's ancestors looked down upon them, their painted eyes seeming to follow the couple as they made their way toward a future that none of those long-dead monarchs could have imagined. As they approached the main entrance, the sound from outside grew louder. Thousands of voices created a low hum that vibrated through the thick stone walls. Some were singing, "God Save the King." Others were chanting messages of support. The crowd had grown throughout the morning as news of their departure spread across social media and news outlets worldwide. "Are you ready for this?" William asked, pausing just before the massive oak doors that separated their private world from the public stage they were about to step onto for the last time as working members of the royal family. Catherine reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. "We've faced everything else together. We'll face this too." The doors swung open, and the roar of the crowd hit them like a physical force. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding symphony of light. Reporters shouted questions that were lost in the cacophony of voices. Security formed a protective corridor, but it felt thin and inadequate against the pressing mass of humanity that had gathered to witness this historic moment. They walked slowly, deliberately, their heads held high despite the emotional storm raging within them. Catherine's training in public appearances served her well, but William could see the toll it was taking. Her smile was perfect, practiced, but her eyes betrayed the depth of her pain. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, broke through the crowd barriers. Security moved to intercept her, but Catherine held up her hand, signaling them to stop. The girl held a small bouquet of daisies, picked from her grandmother's garden that morning. "Princess Catherine," the girl said, her voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "My mummy says you're going away. Will you come back?" Catherine knelt down to the girl's level, accepting the flowers with trembling hands. For a moment, her composure cracked, and tears threatened to spill over. "Thank you, sweetheart. These are beautiful." She paused, searching for words that would be honest but not devastating to a child's heart. Sometimes people have to go on very long journeys. But the love we share never goes away, no matter how far apart we are. The girl nodded solemnly and then, without warning, threw her small arms around Catherine's neck in a fierce hug. The crowd fell silent, as if collectively holding their breath. Cameras captured every second of the embrace, an image that would later become one of the most shared photographs in royal history. William watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. This was why they had fallen in love with their roles in the first place. These genuine connections with people who saw them not just as symbols, but as human beings who cared deeply about others. It was also exactly what they were walking away from. As they continued toward the waiting car, more people pressed forward with flowers, cards, and messages. An elderly man who had served in the military saluted crisply as they passed. A group of young mothers held up their babies, hoping for one last royal wave. Teenagers held up phones, desperate to capture a moment they could share with friends who would never believe they had been there. "This is harder than I thought it would be," Catherine whispered to William as they approached their car. The vehicle sat gleaming in the morning sun, its royal flags flying for the last time with them inside. "The hardest part is still ahead," William replied, his voice tight with emotion. Their driver, James, had been with them for 7 years. He had driven them to countless engagements, waited patiently during long events, and had become something of a confidant during the long rides between appointments. Today, his usual cheerful greeting was replaced by a simple nod and eyes that seemed suspiciously bright. As they settled into the back seat, Catherine turned to wave one final time at the crowd. The faces looking back at her were a mixture of sadness, confusion, and love. These were people who had supported them through scandals, celebrated their wedding, cheered at the births of their children, and now were witnessing something unprecedented in modern royal history. The car began to move slowly through the crowd. Police officers on horseback cleared a path, but the people were reluctant to step back. They pressed against the car windows, hands reaching out as if they could somehow keep the couple from leaving through sheer force of will. Inside the car, William and Catherine sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The decision to step back from royal duties permanently hadn't been made lightly. It had come after months of soul-searching, countless discussions late into the night, and ultimately a threat against their children's safety that had crossed every line they had drawn. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Catherine asked as they turned onto the main road, the castle disappearing behind them. William looked back one last time at the place that had been home, prison, sanctuary, and stage all rolled into one. "I think we're doing the only thing we can do. Our children deserve to grow up without fear. We deserve to love each other without the world watching our every move." The car picked up speed as they left Windsor behind. Ahead lay a new life, one without titles, without constant scrutiny, without the weight of centuries of tradition on their shoulders. But as they drove toward their uncertain future, both of them understood that they were leaving behind more than just their royal duties. They were leaving behind a part of themselves that could never be recovered. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting new shadows and painting the world in shades of gold and amber. It was, Catherine thought, the kind of morning that promised new beginnings, even as it marked the end of everything they had known. The countryside rolled past their windows in a blur of green fields and ancient stone walls. Catherine watched the familiar landscape of her homeland slip away, each mile taking them further from the life they had known and closer to something entirely unknown. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and well-wishers around the world, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. Not yet. William sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched in that way she had learned to recognize over the years. It was the same expression he wore during difficult state dinners, challenging interviews, and the day they had buried his grandmother. He was holding himself together through sheer force of will, but Catherine could see the cracks beginning to show. "The children will be wondering where we are," she said, checking her watch. They had planned to call George, Charlotte, and Louis at precisely 11 o'clock before the news conferences began and the media storm reached its full intensity. "They're safe with your mother," William replied, but his voice carried an edge of worry that hadn't been there an hour ago. The decision to send the children ahead to Catherine's family home had been one of the most difficult parts of this entire process. They needed to protect their children from the chaos that would inevitably follow their announcement, but separating from them, even temporarily, felt like tearing away pieces of their hearts. The car turned onto a smaller road, winding through a village that time seemed to have forgotten. Stone cottages with thatched roofs lined the narrow streets, their gardens blooming with late autumn flowers. An elderly woman hanging laundry on a line looked up as the official car passed, her eyes widening in recognition before she quickly looked away, respecting their privacy in a way that felt both foreign and precious. "Do you remember?" Catherine said softly. "When we used to drive through places like this and dream about what it would be like to just stop? To walk into one of those pubs and have a pint without anyone taking pictures or asking questions?" William's expression softened slightly. "I remember you saying you wanted to learn how to make proper jam from scratch. You were convinced that if you weren't royal, you'd become some sort of countryside domestic goddess." Despite everything, Catherine found herself smiling. "I still want to learn. Maybe now I'll have the chance." The thought felt both thrilling and terrifying. After years of having every minute scheduled, every appearance planned, every word carefully considered, the idea of having time for simple pleasures seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Their phone rang, the special encrypted line that connected them directly to Buckingham Palace. William hesitated before answering, knowing that this conversation would be one of the most difficult of his life. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice formal despite the intimate family relationship. King Charles's voice came through the speaker, heavy with an emotion that royal training could never quite suppress. "William, where are you now?" "About an hour from the safe house, Father. The security detail says everything is in place." William's hand found Catherine's, squeezing tightly. The safe house was a temporary measure, a place where they could stay while making final arrangements for their new life abroad. "The press is going mad, as expected. The Prime Minister has called 3 times already. They want to know if this decision is final." Charles paused, and in that silence, William could hear the weight of a father's love battling with the duty of a king. "It is final," William said, his voice steady despite the cost of those words. "The threats against the children have escalated beyond anything we can accept. We won't risk their safety for the sake of duty anymore. And if I commanded you to return? If I made it a royal decree?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with centuries of tradition and the complex dynamics of both family and monarchy. Catherine held her breath, knowing that this moment would define everything that came after. Then I would respectfully decline to obey. William said quietly. I am a father before I am a prince. I am a husband before I am heir to anything. We've made our choice. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though it lasted only seconds. When Charles spoke again, his voice was thick with unshed tears. Then God go with you both. Take care of my grandchildren, and know that you will always have a home here when you're ready to return. Thank you, Father, for everything. William's voice cracked slightly on the last words, and Catherine saw him wipe his eyes quickly with his free hand. After they hung up, they sat in silence as the car continued through the countryside. The weight of what they had just done, walking away from 1,000 years of royal tradition, disappointing a nation, breaking the hearts of millions of supporters, settled around them like a heavy cloak. He understands, Catherine said finally. He may not agree, but he understands. He's a father too, William replied. I think part of him envies us for having the courage to choose our family over everything else. The car phone rang again, this time displaying a number they both recognized immediately. It was Catherine's mother, calling from the cottage where their children were waiting. Mummy? George's voice came through the speakers, high and excited despite the serious nature of the day. When are you coming home? Charlotte says you're never coming back, but I told her that was silly. Catherine's heart clenched at the innocent trust in her eldest son's voice. We'll be there soon, sweetheart. Are you taking good care of your brother and sister? Yes. We made biscuits with Granny. Louis got flour everywhere, and Charlotte cried because hers didn't look like flowers. But I helped them, and now they're happy again. The simple domesticity of the scene was both comforting and heartbreaking. Their children were adapting to this massive change in their lives with the resilience that only children possessed, finding joy in biscuit making while their parents grappled with decisions that would reshape their entire world. Put Charlotte on, please, William said, leaning closer to the phone. Daddy! Charlotte's voice was breathless with excitement. Granny let us feed the chickens. There's a big red one called Bertha, and she's very bossy. She stole my piece of bread right out of my hand. That sounds wonderful, Princess. Are you having fun with Granny? Yes, but when are you coming? I want to show you my drawing of our new house. It has a really big garden where we can run and play football, and no one will take pictures. William and Catherine exchanged a look. Even at her young age, Charlotte had already developed an awareness of the constraints that came with their royal status. The idea of playing freely in a garden without photographers hiding in the bushes was something she had dreamed about but never experienced. We'll be there very soon, William promised. Keep taking care of Louis for us. I will, Daddy. Louis says he misses you. He keeps asking for Mummy's cuddles. After they said goodbye, Catherine turned to stare out the window, tears flowing freely now. The countryside had given way to a more secluded area, rolling hills dotted with sheep and divided by ancient stone walls. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely unlike the formal gardens and manicured landscapes they were accustomed to. They're going to be fine, William said, though he seemed to be trying to convince himself as much as her. They're young enough to adapt. In a few years, this will just be their normal life. But will we be fine? Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest all morning. William, we've never been anything but royal. We met at university, but even then, you were the prince. I was the girl dating the prince. What if we don't know how to be just us? It was a question that had haunted both of them during the long months of planning their departure. Their entire relationship had been built within the framework of royal life. Their courtship had been conducted under the watchful eye of the press. Their marriage had been a state occasion watched by billions. Their children had been born into a world where their every milestone would be documented and celebrated by strangers. Then we'll learn together, William said, taking her hand again. We'll make mistakes, and we'll figure it out as we go. But we'll do it together, and we'll do it as a family. The car began to slow as they approached a set of tall iron gates set into a high stone wall. The safe house was a Georgian manor that had been quietly acquired by the security services years earlier for situations exactly like this one. It was elegant, but not ostentatious, comfortable but secure, and most importantly, completely private. As they drove up the gravel drive, Catherine caught sight of smoke rising from one of the chimneys. Someone had prepared the house for their arrival, had lit fires to warm the rooms where they would spend their last few days on British soil. The thoughtfulness of that simple gesture brought fresh tears to her eyes. "This is really happening," she whispered as the car came to a stop in front of the main entrance. "Yes," William replied, his voice steady now with newfound resolve. "This is really happening, and for the first time in our lives, we get to write our own story." The car doors opened, and they stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. No crowds waited here, no cameras flashed, no reporters shouted questions. There was only the sound of wind through the trees and the distant bleating of sheep in the fields beyond. For the first time in hours, Catherine felt like she could breathe freely. The safe house felt like stepping into another world. As they walked through the front door, Catherine was struck by how normal everything looked. There were no gilded frames, no ancestral portraits staring down from the walls, no red carpet or formal receiving rooms. Instead, there were comfortable sofas arranged around a crackling fireplace, books scattered on coffee tables, and fresh flowers in simple vases. A woman in her 50s emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on a tea towel. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and when she smiled at them, it was with genuine warmth rather than the careful deference they had grown accustomed to. "Your Royal Highnesses, welcome. I'm Margaret, and I'll be looking after you during your stay. I've prepared some lunch, and there are fresh linens on all the beds. Please, make yourselves at home." "Thank you, Margaret," Catherine said, then paused. "I'm sorry, but how should we... what should you call us?" Margaret's smile widened. "Well, that rather depends on what you'd like me to call you, doesn't it? You're the ones writing the rules now." It was such a simple observation, but it hit them both like a revelation. For their entire adult lives, protocol had dictated every interaction, every greeting, every social exchange. The idea that they could now choose something as basic as how they wanted to be addressed felt revolutionary. "William and Catherine," William said after a moment, testing the words. "Just William and Catherine." "Right then, William and Catherine it is. There's soup warming on the stove and sandwiches in the sitting room. The secure phone line is set up in the study whenever you're ready to make your calls." As Margaret disappeared back into the kitchen, William and Catherine stood in the hallway, looking around at their temporary new world. Everything felt different without the weight of titles and formality. Even their clothes seemed to hang differently on their bodies, as if the absence of royal duty had somehow changed their physical presence. "I keep waiting for someone to tell us what we're supposed to do next," Catherine admitted, pulling off her coat and hanging it on a simple wooden peg by the door. "We eat lunch," William said, as if the simplicity of it was a small miracle. "We call the children. We figure out tomorrow, and then the day after that." They found the sitting room warmed by another fire, with a tray of sandwiches and a pot of tea waiting on a low table. For the first time all day, they sat down without thinking about cameras, without considering the angle of their posture or the expression on their faces. They were just a man and woman, tired and emotional, having lunch together. "The jam is homemade," Catherine observed, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Strawberry, I think." "Margaret probably made it herself. Can you imagine? Making jam because you want to, not because it's a photo opportunity or a way to connect with local farmers?" They ate in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what they were doing. Outside the windows, they could see rolling fields stretching to the horizon, unmarked by the formal landscapes of royal residences. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost foreign after years of living in places where every tree had been planted for a purpose, every view carefully designed. The secure phone rang, interrupting their quiet lunch. William answered, knowing it would be updates from their security team about the media response to their departure. "The announcement went out an hour ago," the voice on the other end reported. "The reaction is significant. All major news networks have broken into regular programming. Social media is calling it everything from the abdication crisis of the 21st century to the greatest love story of our time." William rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "What's the tone? Are people angry?" "Mixed. There's shock, obviously, some criticism about duty and tradition, but there's also a lot of support, particularly from young parents. The hashtag #ProtectTheChildren is trending worldwide. The interview requests are already in the thousands." "We won't be giving any interviews," William said firmly. "Not now, maybe not ever. Our statement stands as it is." After he hung up, Catherine reached across the space between them and took his hand. "Do you want to know what people are saying?" "No," he said immediately, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes. But not today. Today, I just want to focus on us, on the children, on this moment." They finished their lunch and then made the call they had been both anticipating and dreading. Catherine's mother answered on the first ring, and within seconds, they could hear the excited voices of their children in the background. "Mummy, Daddy!" Louis's voice came through clearly, filled with the pure joy that only a 4-year-old could express. "Granny made us jam tarts and I ate 3. 3 whole jam tarts? My goodness." Catherine laughed, and for the first time all day it felt genuine. "Were they delicious?" "The best ever. Charlotte saved you one, but then she ate it too. She said sorry, but she was really hungry." "I said sorry," Charlotte's voice protested from somewhere nearby. "And I was going to make them new ones, but Granny said we had to wait for you to come help." The next hour was spent on the phone with their children, hearing about their day, their adventures with their grandmother, their excitement about the new house they would soon call home. Each child had their own questions and concerns, but they were adapting with the remarkable flexibility of youth. George, their eldest at 10, was the most serious. "Some of the security men have different uniforms," he observed. "Are we not royal anymore?" It was such a direct question, asked with such innocence, that both parents struggled for a moment to find the right words. "We're still the same people we've always been," William finally said. "We're still your parents. We still love you more than anything in the world. But yes, some things are going to be different. We're going to have a different kind of life now." "A better kind?" George asked. "We hope so, sweetheart. We really hope so." After they said goodbye to the children, with promises to see them the next day, William and Catherine walked out into the garden behind the house. The late afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "In 3 days, we'll be on a plane," Catherine said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool air. "Flying to a new country, a new life, new everything." "Are you scared?" William asked, though he already knew the answer because he could see it in her eyes, the same fear and anticipation that he felt in his own chest. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited." "When was the last time we were excited about the unknown? Usually we know exactly what we're going to be doing 6 months from now, a year from now. Every engagement scheduled, every appearance planned. Now we don't know what tomorrow will bring, let alone next year." They stood together in the fading light, husband and wife, parents, 2 people who had made an unprecedented decision that would ripple through history. Behind them, Smoke continued to rise from the chimney of the house that was sheltering them in their final days as British royals. "Do you think we'll miss it?" Catherine asked. "The ceremony, the tradition, the sense of being part of something bigger than ourselves." William considered the question carefully. "I think we'll miss some of it. I'll miss the veterans' events, the way their faces light up when they meet someone who understands their service. I'll miss the charities we've worked with, the people we've helped. I'll miss feeling like we were making a difference. But I won't miss the feeling that our children are growing up in a goldfish bowl. I won't miss lying awake at night wondering if some random person with a grudge is planning to hurt them because of who they are. I won't miss having to consider the political implications of everything we say or do." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I won't miss reading about our private conversations in newspapers the next day. I won't miss having strangers analyze our body language and decide whether our marriage is happy based on how we hold hands." As if to prove her point, William reached for her hand now, and they stood there simply holding on to each other as darkness began to fall around them. There were no photographers to capture the moment, no reporters to analyze the gesture, no protocol officers to ensure they were standing at the proper distance from each other. "Look," Catherine said softly, pointing up at the sky. "Stars!" It was such a simple observation, but it carried so much weight. In London, light pollution made it nearly impossible to see stars from their royal residences. Here, in this quiet corner of the countryside, the sky was beginning to fill with pinpricks of light, each one clearly visible in the clear night air. "I can't remember the last time I saw stars," William said, wonder clear in his voice. "The children have never really seen them. Not like this. Maybe tomorrow night we can bring them out here. Show them what they've been missing." They stood there for a long time, hands clasped, faces turned up to the growing darkness above them. For the first time in their adult lives, they had nowhere they needed to be, no schedule to keep, no one watching them or judging their choices. "Whatever happens next," Catherine said finally, "whatever difficulties we face or mistakes we make, at least we'll face them together. At least we'll be free to make them." "Together," William agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "Always together." Behind them, Margaret had turned on the lights in the house, and warm yellow light spilled out across the garden where they stood. It looked welcoming and safe, a harbor in the storm they had created by choosing love over duty, family over tradition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new possibilities. But tonight, under a sky full of stars they had forgotten existed, William and Catherine stood together at the threshold of their new life, ready to discover who they could become when they were finally free to be themselves. The farewell had been like no other, because it marked not just an ending, but a beginning. Not just a loss, but a choice. Not just a goodbye to one life, but a hello to another, one that they would write together, one day at a time, under skies full of stars that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time.